Trump promised he'd end the Iran conflict in 24 hours. That was 6 weeks ago. Today, oil hit a 3-month high. The VIX spiked hard. And the recession model just jumped to 67 out of 100. Something's not working, and I think we need to talk about what happens if the guy who said he could fix everything can't. What's up, guys? It's Tom here. If you've been following this channel, you know we've been ahead of this stuff. We flagged the jobs overcount months before the government admitted it was wrong by hundreds of thousands. Called Bitcoin's crash before it dropped over a third, the defensive portfolio's been quietly beating the S&P while everyone else was buying the dip on leverage. So when the model moves, I pay attention, and today it moved hard up to 67 in a single session. That's pre-recession territory. That's the highest it's been since I launched this thing. And the reason it moved tells you everything about where we're headed. Markets are starting to price in the possibility that this Iran situation doesn't get resolved, that the master negotiator might have met his match. Let's go back to what Trump actually said, Inauguration Day. Quote, "I will have this conflict resolved within 24 hours of taking office." Direct quote. Not, "I'll work on it." Not, "It's a priority." 24 hours, and look, the guy's got a track record of bold promises, some he delivers on. The USMCA trade deal, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, getting North Korea to the table, some he doesn't. The wall replacing Obamacare on day one, making China pay for everything. But this one was different. This one had a timer on it, a very specific, very public timer. 24 hours became a few days. Then he said by the end of the week, then we'll handle it very soon. Now it's been 6 weeks, and we're not just failing to de-escalate, we're actively escalating. 2 more carrier groups in the Persian Gulf. You don't deploy entire battle groups for diplomacy. Strikes on Iranian proxies ramping up every week, oil creeping higher every single day. That doesn't look like resolution. That looks like preparation for something much bigger. And here's where it gets really interesting. Markets were giving Trump the benefit of the doubt for weeks. The assumption was that even if it took longer than promised, he'd figure it out. Guy's a negotiator. He wrote the art of the deal. He'll find an angle nobody else thought of. Oil stayed relatively calm, VIX stayed comfortable, risk on trade everywhere, tech was rallying, crypto was pumping, everyone was betting on the Trump bump continuing, but something fundamental shifted in the last few days, and I think it started with that leaked Pentagon memo about sustained operations in the region. Oil's up dramatically just this week. The VIX spiked from comfortable levels to serious anxiety territory. That's not a gentle rise, that's not profit taking, that's anxiety turning into legitimate fear. Bond yields are backing up to their highest levels since the debt ceiling crisis. Credit spreads are widening. High-yield bonds are getting crushed. And the model picked all of it up immediately. When market fear spikes and oil climbs, and credit tightens all at the same time. Historically, that's not noise. That's a signal that smart money is positioning for something bad. So here's how this plays out. There are really 3 paths from here, and only one of them ends well. Path 1 is the optimist case. Trump pulls a rabbit out of the hat, some backdoor deal we don't see coming. Maybe the Saudis broke or something. Maybe China applies pressure because they need Iranian oil. Iran steps back, saves face somehow, and oil drops back down. Markets rally hard on the relief. Crisis over, Trump looks like a genius. Recession model drops back to safe territory. It's possible. The guy's surprised people before. Path 2 is the muddle through scenario. No deal, but no major escalation either. This becomes the new normal. We settle into this low-level conflict. Oil stays elevated but doesn't spike. Markets get used to the risk premium. We trade in a range for months. Economy slows but doesn't crash. That's also possible. Most geopolitical tensions end up here. But path 3 is the one that breaks everything. This escalates dramatically. Iran decides they're tired of being pushed around and blocks the Strait of Hormuz. A massive chunk of global oil supply gets cut off overnight. Oil prices explode. Gas prices spike nationwide. Trucking costs explode. Food prices spike because everything gets more expensive to transport. Inflation jumps from manageable levels to crisis territory in a month. The Fed's completely stuck between collapsing growth and spiking inflation. That's the recession scenario. That's the one where unemployment shoots up dramatically. And right now, the model is pricing path 3 as more likely than path 1. And here's the part that makes this different from past Middle East conflicts. Trump ran specifically on being the guy who ends wars, not starts them. America First meant no more endless foreign entanglements. His base voted for peace through strength, not another Iraq or Afghanistan. They voted for the guy who criticized every president for getting bogged down over there. But now he's in the same trap. If Iran calls his bluff, if they basically dare him to do something about it, what's he supposed to do? Back down and look weak? Admit the 24-hour promise was nonsense. That destroys his negotiating credibility for everything else. Trade deals, immigration, you name it. Or does he escalate and own a war he specifically promised to end? That betrays the core promise of his campaign. That's a lose-lose politically. There's no good outcome. And markets absolutely hate lose scenarios. They hate uncertainty. They hate when the guy who's supposed to have all the answers clearly doesn't have any good ones. The model's political risk indicator is flashing extreme warning signals right now. But here's the mechanic that really matters for the economy. The Fed, they're already in an impossible position. They've been cutting rates with inflation expectations still elevated above their target. That's not exactly the price stability they're mandated to maintain. Powell's been walking this tightrope for months, cutting rates because employment is softening, but trying not to cut too fast because inflation isn't fully under control. Now add an oil shock on top of that delicate balance. Suddenly gas prices double, diesel prices explode, food prices spike because everything gets shipped by truck. Airlines start adding fuel surcharges, inflation expectations jump to crisis levels. What's the Fed supposed to do? They can't cut more rates. That would pour gasoline on the inflation fire. Everyone would know they're choosing employment over price stability, which destroys their credibility, but they can't hike either because that would crush an economy that's already showing serious cracks. We're creating barely any jobs each month. That's barely keeping up with population growth. Unemployment's been creeping higher. Consumer spending growth has slowed dramatically. Credit card delinquencies are rising. Auto loan defaults are spiking. The economy is already fragile, and rate hikes would shatter it completely. They're trapped, completely trapped. And trapped central banks don't prevent recessions. They cause them. So what does this actually mean for your money? If you're sitting in index funds, you're essentially betting that path one happens. That Trump figures it out, oil stays calm, markets keep climbing toward new highs. Maybe that's right. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic. But let's look at the risk-reward. If everything goes perfectly, if Iran backs down and oil crashes, you might gain decent returns this year. But if Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, if oil spikes dramatically, you lose a quarter of your money in a matter of weeks. That's not a good bet. That's terrible risk management. If you're carrying variable rate debt, this gets ugly really fast. Credit card rates are already at record highs. Home equity lines are expensive. Add an inflation spike from oil, and the Fed's forced to hike rates aggressively to maintain credibility. Your borrowing costs go through the roof at exactly the wrong time, right when your job might be at risk. If you're retired or close to it, your supposedly safe fixed income gets destroyed. Bond prices fall when rates rise. Your CDs and treasury bills might pay more going forward, but the bonds you already own lose value. Your safe money becomes not safe money, and if you're young and think you can ride this out, remember that recessions aren't just market corrections, they're job destroyers. If you're early in your career, if you don't have years of experience in relationships, you're the first to get cut when companies start reducing costs. And here's the piece nobody's connecting yet. The labor market is already falling apart underneath all the headline noise. We're creating barely any jobs. Both the short-term and long-term averages are stall speed. That's barely keeping up with population growth, and it's way below what we need for a healthy economy. Job openings are down dramatically from their peak. The quits rate is collapsing, which means people are scared to leave their jobs. Initial claims are trending higher every week. Now layer on an oil-driven recession on top of an already weak labor market. Companies that were already thinking about cutting costs suddenly have to. Hiring freezes that were temporary become permanent. Layoffs that were targeted become broad-based. Unemployment jumps dramatically in months. That's millions of people. Real people with mortgages and car payments and kids in college. The model's seeing this connection. It's not just looking at geopolitical risk in isolation. It's seeing geopolitical risk hitting an economy that's already vulnerable. That's why the score jumped so dramatically. That's why we're suddenly in pre-recession territory. And look, nobody wants this. Not the recession, not the war, not any of it. There are real people's lives at stake in multiple ways. American soldiers who might get deployed, Iranian civilians who don't have anything to do with their government's decisions, American families who might lose jobs or see their savings get crushed, but ignoring the risk because it's uncomfortable, because it's scary, doesn't make it go away. It just makes you unprepared when it hits. Bottom line, the model is at 67 out of 100. That's pre-recession territory. Trump's 24-hour promise is now 6 weeks old, and the situation is escalating, not resolving. Markets are starting to price in failure. I remain heavily defensive, large cash position, reduced equity exposure dramatically. Energy stocks as a hedge against oil spikes, short-term treasuries that can be rolled over if rates rise. Same positioning I've held since the model launched, and it's outperformed the S&P significantly while taking dramatically less risk. The forecast is now showing high recession probability if oil breaks key levels and stays there. That's not a prediction. That's not me trying to scare you. That's just what the historical data shows when you combine weak employment, elevated inflation expectations, and an oil shock. If you want to track this stuff in real time, if you want to see all the indicators and the full forecast, I built a complete dashboard at recessionistpro.com. Here's exactly what to watch in the next 2 weeks. First, oil prices. If they break above key resistance levels and hold there, the geopolitical risk indicator fires automatically, and the model jumps even higher. Second, watch for any announcement of a third carrier group heading to the Persian Gulf. 2 carrier groups is deterrence. 3 carrier groups is preparation for a major operation. And third, watch Trump's language very carefully. If he stops saying very soon and starts saying all options are on the table or we won't be taken advantage of, that's the signal that negotiation has failed, and we're moving toward path 3. Those phrases are diplomatic code for we're done talking. When you hear them, that's when you know the 24-hour promise has officially died.